We are now recording the April 10th edition of the Node.js modules team. I'm going to go ahead and quickly hand off hosting duties to Jordan Harband. So I should be able to close the stream now. Sorry I can't make it, y'all. I am in Europe, and it is late, and I'm at dinner. But please message me if you have any problems, and then I'll follow up with getting this video on YouTube afterwards. Okay? Bye.
Thanks, Miles. Okay. So I've never done this before, so please feel free to interrupt me if I am forgetting anything. But I'm looking here at the agenda that was posted on GitHub, and looks like I see 6 different bullet points. First one is about locking down the process and buffer globals. Since we have an hour and we always overshoot it, maybe we can try and keep things closer to 5 minutes than 10 minutes. And if things need to run late, that's okay. But hopefully that'll help us meet our time. So I think, is that your topic?
Sorry, could someone who can take good minutes take the minutes? Because I really don't take good minutes.
I'm on my iPad, so I can't volunteer to do that. But if anyone else would, that would be great.
Right. Shall I dive into the process and buffer topic briefly then?
Yeah, why don't we do that? If it would be great to have someone take minutes. If we miss gaps, then we can refer to the recording later and try and transcribe it.
All right.
Yeah, Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, so as discussed before, the approach is to basically deprecate these globals just in ECMAScript modules. Again, my hope on this is not necessarily even to get full consensus that we want to do this, but more to kind of say we should keep the door open on this. That's the kind of position I'm taking on it now, because once we unflag those globals, we're stuck with them for the rest of Node.js's life, effectively. So the benefits of it are: a process gives you access to high resolution timers, all the native bindings, all the environment variables. It's like root level security stuff. And the question is, do we want every single module that you install on NPM to always, for the rest of the life of Node, have access to every single root level security thing? And there is an argument to be made that it might be possible to improve the modular security in future, and that this could sort of be something on the path to paving the way for that. Sorry, I'll just keep it very quick. The first step that we've done for that is to make process and buffer getters on the current Node 12, and that avoids one of the possible breaking changes of this feature. So we've kind of reserved it in that way. And at the moment, Matteo has put a block on this feature. So I think that the main thing at the moment is actually working through the block with Matteo in terms of how to move forward on this. But if anyone wants to share any thoughts on it, please do. But otherwise, I think I just need to keep taking it up with Matteo at this point.
Yeah, I assume nobody else wants.
Yeah, Slow, you're the only one with your hand raised. I would like to be after you, but go ahead.
Actually, go ahead, Jordan. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with you, Guy, that once we've unflagged, these globals must remain present for the lifetime of ESM and Node. So if we are going to remove them, prior to unflagging is the time. I think it's fine to remove them at any point up until that point if we decide we want to remove them. I think there's a bigger premise that isn't necessarily agreed on, that the very long roadmap to having a different security model for Node modules is something that is possible or desired consistently. So that I don't know if that's a long discussion. That's probably not worth resolving before now, but or in this group. But the other thing is the general thrust of my pushback has not been about the buffer global, which you can get rid of all you want. It's about the process global, and I would personally rather still see the specific parts of it that you don't like be removed, while the global itself remains, because it's used for environment detection. And I think that's an important use case, and also having the same way to do it in ESM and CJS is valuable. That's it. Go for it, Slow.
Yeah. So actually, two things. The question that I still don't have didn't find an answer for is platform detection. I think it comes hand in hand with worrying about removing process. Is a clear path to what people will copy and paste to know they're in Node. And the second point is I know that Navigator in the browser is flavored depending on the context. The idea that we could have a process, even if it's through a proxy, like a frozen proxy kind of thing, become a sanitized proxy in the module scope. So I think those are the only two thoughts that keep coming up related to this. But definitely I'm for making it safer.
Sure. Yeah, these are big discussions, and the security and usability arguments are, very, very important areas, and areas that need to be fleshed out. And obviously, we can't go through that all right now. But to respond very briefly on those 2 points, if we wanted to have a process proxy or some kind of restricted process, this work would be the first step towards that, because we're providing a different version of the global. So this would be a path to that, and it would be the path to that. So that is one of the ways we could go. And the reasons for keeping process are exactly as you say, detecting these common detection cases. And I think there's code that does that, and so we need to be able to work out what those workflows become. Jordan, after you previously mentioned this concern, I posted an issue to Dino discussing what they would want to do for process.environment.node environment, and the response I got back was that I can share the thread, but as far as I recall, that actually this isn't necessarily a good pattern, doing process.environment.node environment and having it through a sort of a global. A lot of the process environment, node environment production checks are actually doing requires. For example, if you look at the React source code in the index file, it has the sort of shift between the index for development and the index for production down on this, which is actually a require. And if we did this in a more modular way, if we provided a more modular way of saying, in production, this is my index file, in development, this is my other index file, then that's something that build tools could probably pick up, and that kind of touches on the conditional stuff that we're discussing in the export maps repo.
So Jan, you have your hand raised, so I won't speak for long. But Guy, I think so. There's a few things. Deno already has a global called Deno, so you could use that for environment detection. I suspect people will. Number two, there's a long list of things Deno thinks are bad patterns, or Ryan thinks are bad patterns, that there is in no way broad agreement on that any of those things are bad patterns. And number three is determining entry points per environment is only one of many use cases for detecting the environment. And so while for each of those use cases, exploring alternative declarative ways to do that is great, that's not going to solve them all.
Certainly,
we can talk more about
discussion.
But, so just very, very quickly here. Also, my understanding is that we are removing the global, not process itself. Like, you can always require process or import process, and you have the object. So if you want to get the env, you still can, and it's backwards compatible with I think all LTS versions. So there's no reason why you couldn't import process from process env.node env and do your checks.
That's true. I mean, build tools could be updated to support that. But I mean, at the moment, they will not necessarily. I don't know. That's also a tricky. You're right. There's lots of paths for doing that, but there is also a lot of code on the web and in Node that behaves a certain way because type of process is undefined or not. It's the same reason that like global couldn't ship as global.
So, can I add just the secondary importance of platform detection? It's not platform detection in a predictable way. You're rather doing it sometimes not even knowing if you're in a module. So when you're doing type of process, sometimes you're writing a file that you expect would not necessarily run under any known conditions. So it's really going to take a lot of work there. It's doable, definitely. Everything is doable. But I think importing or requiring only addresses access to the features of process, but it does not really satisfy the case where if you import process, it crashes your browser because you're not a node. So there will be very, very tricky questions, I think, here.
And then Wes had some points in the chat. Wes, do you want to say them or should I TLDR them?
I mean, I can say them. I mean, it's pretty much just that, like, I don't think moving to ES, like, yes, removing these unsafe process globals is good, universally good. It's probably something that shouldn't have been global in the first place. However, compact concerns say that you can't quite just remove them. Like, you have to do more than that. And by that same token, I don't think when ES modules are made is like an excuse to say, well, we can remove them now. It doesn't enable that. It's not like, it doesn't somehow make it okay. For the same reason that I don't think that you can just take FS and just discard the non-promise versions of FS when we're in ESM. Like, no, you have to present the same APIs. The fact that the module loader and the module system is changing doesn't give carte blanche to edit the APIs presented to those modules. And I don't think that it's similar to removing double_ file name or double_ dir name. We consider those module features, and honestly, the fact that we consider those module features like hurts me a little bit because they, as far as anyone who's writing them is considered, they look a hell of a lot like globals. And the fact that they're not there and they're not there in ESM is, to me, more of a technical restriction than anything else. And like moving process and buffer into module scoped variables and then saying, well, they're okay to remove an ESM now doesn't make it okay to me because they are still effectively global. Like that technicality is just a technicality to me. They still look the same. Their implementation is just different. Their usage is the same.
To just clarify that briefly, and I think we've gone over time now as well. So Jordan, feel free to cut us off anytime you like.
Yeah, there's definitely some, we're getting close to that time. So yeah, go ahead.
We put process and buffer into a kind of a scope wrapper, but that part of it is actually just a performance optimization. For all intents and purposes, the way this works is terrible, but the way this works is by checking that when you access process, whether you're in a module environment or not, and it's actually a stack-based check, and so it's almost like an access control on a global. And this is not a pattern that Node should do going forward into the future, but it's a pattern that works. I mean, you can eval and eval and eval that accesses the global, and it works at a syntactical language level. We couldn't do this for import FS necessarily because we couldn't do this, for example, for property access, because the global access is specifically syntactic, that we can make sure that this kind of check works out. But generally in languages, you don't want to be doing this. But yeah, it's an exception that we can make work out. Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it further offline if anyone wants to discuss. But otherwise, I'll just continue having these discussions, and hopefully we can make some more progress on these ideas before we unflag.
Okay, and then Jeremiah, you had your hand raised. So do you still want to share a point?
Yeah, if possible, actually.
Cool. Yeah, just let's be brief and be aware that I'm going to ask everyone not to respond. So if you're going to say something controversial, you're going to bother people. Go for it.
Okay. So I was going to bring up the file name dir name thing too, but also I think maybe we've overlooked another thing now that I think about it, is the global object going to be available as global? Because I mean, in other contexts, that's not the case. So I guess that's kind of a question which defeats.
That seems like a separate issue to file that we should discuss in the next meeting, because that is an interesting question. But I think it will have the same environmental detection concerns as process. But okay, so I think we've talked about this topic a lot. We have 40 minutes left for 5 things. The next one is flags functionality options, issue 300. I believe this is Geoffrey's.
Hey.
Go for it.
Yeah, so let's see. Can I share anything? I don't know what the hell's going on here. So yeah, I opened a issue and a PR. Let me know if you can see this. So dash type got converted kind of at the last second as part of the upstream PR into dash entry type. It was right around when we kind of found what I considered a bug with it, that it wasn't behaving as at least I had expected it to be. Clearly others had expected it to behave this way. And it wasn't, you know, must have been miscommunication there. Apologize for that. Yeah, it's, I feel that the current implementation is a foot gun, as several people in the upstream PR had mentioned, that they expect that if you set the entry type or set the type of your entry point, it will, that sets the type of your whole project, or at least of that package scope. And that's not the case. It's like if you have index.js and then, you know, startup.js, if you set entry type equals module index.js, that treats index.js as ESM, but then startup.js is treated as common.js. And pretty much no one's expecting that behavior. And I don't think anyone would expect like files in the same folder with the same file extension to behave differently. So I think it's certainly a foot gun as currently implemented. And so the initial proposal was a flag called package type, which would have basically, if you used it, it does exactly the same thing as the type field in package.json, and then which would behave, I think, as people were expecting entry type to behave, but people had some objections to that. So then the kind of next best option is just get rid of a flag to override the type of a file at all. And we still need a flag for eval, print, and standard in, the like string input types. So I was proposing we just rename this, not just rename it, but rename it from entry type to input type and restrict it to only eval, print, and standard in. And that's it. Like if users want a flag for working with files, then we can see why they want it, evaluate their use cases. Would it be more appropriate for entry type or for package type, or do we not want to support it? But like basically I was like, let's scale this back for the initial release as part of Node 12, and then, you know, kind of start the conversation with users to see like if we want more flags or a broader scope of a flag, what it should be from there. So I can't see what people are chatting, so I'm going to stop sharing so I can see.
Cool. I just indicated that I was fake raising my hand. So I think the way you've explained yourself in the issue in particular is very well done, and certainly here as well. And I think regardless of the bike shed about the argument names, to me the only thing that is like strictly critical is the like string input case, input type in other words, because there is no way to control the parse goal otherwise. So for me, that's pretty, like, we have to at least provide input type. For like the only use case, like when we did all our use cases documents and stuff, the only thing that was really like the only other thing that really overlapped with this was I have a one-off script and I want to run it with Node, and it's not necessarily part of a package. And if you can rename the file, you can already just give it a CJS or MJS extension or whatever. So that's not a problem. the problem arises if you want your one-off script to have ESM syntax or an ESM parsable and have .js, or if you have an extensionless file. So
yeah, can I address that? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that was the thing that Miles had mentioned in the conversation about this. And that is basically the one downside of, like, if we remove this flag, that specific case of extensionless essentially becomes slightly harder, in that, like, say, like, npm, which should be an extensionless file, or like if you had a backup shell script and you wanted to be able to run it via just backup instead of typing backup.mjs. Basically, it just means you have to create a symlink from extensionless backup to backup.mjs or backup.js that's in a folder with a package.json. And yeah, that sucks a little, but I just don't think that use case is so huge of, like, wanting to run extensionless CSM files. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to be burned by this flag not behaving the way they expect it to. And I think it's, asking the people who want to run an extensionless shell script essentially to make a symlink feels like a pretty small price to pay to be able to do that, in order to spare the broader public of, a foot gun essentially. So sorry, Jordan.
Yeah, so that was essentially, I think, like, I agree with your conclusions there. I think that the challenge is that whenever we've made a decision that makes a use case impossible, we definitely have to explain ourselves. And when we make a decision that makes a use case annoying, we should explain ourselves. And extensionless files, if we go with input type, we will have to explain ourselves for extensionless files. We will also have to explain ourselves for people who just have a folder full of files but no package JSON. But it seems reasonable in that case to me to just say, well, then just add a package JSON with a type whatever, or with some field, and you're fine. So that's kind of, so I'm content with just doing input type. In other words, I think that we should just be all clear that we're then saying extensionless files are now going to be annoying. And Salah has their hand raised, so go for it.
So I have a question. I'm not sure if it falls under this context or not, but if I have in my package JSON bin, and the bin points to a JS file, I might be mistaken, but doesn't that imply that when somebody installs my package, it's symlinked into their node modules .bin? If that is the case, then this will be a very common use case. And again, I'm maybe less experienced than most.
So
here.
I think because it's a symlink to a file inside your package would have a package.json. So in your package.json could have a type module field, and so that would cover it.
Great.
If they happen to run it with like -- preserve symlinks, then it wouldn't work. But I mean, no one should be running, like, no one should be using, like, if they use that flag, then they know what they're getting essentially.
So the UX concern I had here was about the preserve symlink flag. In this very particular case, maybe we want to explore if this is a case that is separate from preserve symlinks in general, or is it exactly what the preserve symlinks flag people found useful to utilize it? So that's all I'm trying to point at, is that sometimes a symlink that is very, very predictable like this one may not be as a symlink that is in your sources that is a convenient symlink in that point. I'm sorry, I'm not catching up on the chat as I talk. Thanks.
I mean, I think a lot of things break when you use that flag. Like, you can't run npm with that flag, for example. So, like, I think, that flag has a particular use case that people would use it for. I don't think anyone's going to, like, put that in their node options and expect to, like, run all the time with that, because they'd never be able to use npm, for example. I don't know. I mean, we could see, like, we could also, like, push this out and see what people complain. They're like, I need to use preserve symlinks for this use case and I can't do it with this. And then we try to figure out another solution, or we bring back entry type or something. But
that's a good strategy. I like the idea of trying out. while under the flag, of course.
Yeah. Because I can't think of a use case for when people would use that flag, to be honest. There must be use cases out there. So, but before, we do something that I think most people wouldn't want for a use case we can't think of, maybe we should, kind of do it the other way around and let people point out what they need and why.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Sorry, there's a lot of iOS menus to get out of. Cool, okay, so I think we've discussed this a bit. I think we should have further discussion in the issue.
I think
unless Geoffrey, go ahead.
Well, do we have consensus to merge in the PR? Does anyone have objections to it?
So that's, I guess, the next question. Well, hold on. How many? I don't know how to do the quorum math because I've never thought about it.
We have 9 people here. I think there's 18 of us, so that's exactly half. I don't know if that means we have quorum or not.
Well, let's continue. Oh, we need 10. Oh, 10. Okay. Well, let me double check the member list while we're discussing here. So yeah, are there any objections to merging the PR, the input type PR?
Does that include input type auto?
No, I deliberately put that as a separate PR. I mean, I don't know if people, obviously people are going to object to that, so I'm assuming we're not merging that in today, but even if that was approved today, I would not have put that as an upstream PR, like merged together. Like I would submit 2 of them because I totally expect upstream people to complain about auto as well. So I think that should definitely be its own thing.
Yeah, personal opinions aside, I think keeping them separate is wise for all sorts of reasons. Cool. Okay, so then it sounds like, and we do have quorum since there's 17 members and 10 of them are here. So it sounds like we have consensus to merge the input type PR.
Sweet.
And then presumably to upstream that as well. Is that cool? Yeah, everyone agree? All right. I've never run the meeting before again, so just making sure. All right, so great. That's some progress. Now we can move on to the next item, which is dual mode packages. There are 2 issues, 299 and 273.
Well, did we want to do the auto one?
Oh, do you have? Well, we can, I guess. I mean, it's not on there, and we have 4 other bullet points.
I think it was on there. It was on the agenda.
Entry. Oh, you're right. I do see input type auto. Okay, let's talk about auto.
So, I mean, assuming we have objections, so we don't have to spend too much time on this. But I was proposing I think it's pretty common, especially for string input, where people they might be piping into Node from some other source, so they might not know what the string input is. Like the coffee command and the babel command, they don't use eval, they use vm.run script. So this would be the other place to add it. But I kind of want to add some way to have an auto mode for detecting ESM. And obviously it's not a perfect science because, as we know, there's no unambiguous syntax to definitively detect ESM versus not. So we had a long discussion about this in the PR when this was being debated about, we can certainly detect if something is ESM when it has import and export statements, because that will simply throw in non-ESM. So at least we know that. So the question then is for a file without an import and export statement, it could be ESM that just somehow doesn't import or export anything, or it could be CommonJS, or it might not be CommonJS, and we just don't know. So what do we do in that situation? There was discussion about whether to look for references to the CommonJS globals, and if you see those, then it's likely that it's CommonJS, and if it's not, then it's truly just ambiguous. Basically the consensus seemed to be that was just too messy, especially when you consider cases if require to try to detect if you're in a CommonJS environment or not, and then therefore that's well, that is a reference to the CommonJS global require, et cetera, et cetera. So the end result of the discussion was basically redefine the goal, in that we're not trying to definitively detect CommonJS. We're just trying to we're just saying if it contains import and export, run it as module. Otherwise, run it as CommonJS the way it is now. And just by definition, ambiguous files get run as CommonJS the way they do now. And that's just the definition of the feature. Like you would put in the docs, that is what auto does. Run as ESM if import export. And then else as common.js. And so whether or not we added to input type is kind of a separate question. I would most want it to be added to, I think it's vm.createScript or whatever it is, or run script. So that Babel and CoffeeScript and TypeScript and anything else that generates a string of JavaScript to be run, where those tools might not know the type of the input, have a way of like kind of deferring to Node for that detection piece, rather than all these tools having to come up with their own solution for it. And then we have inconsistent solutions between the various tools. So Jordan?
I have my, I have my hand raised and then discuss after that. So I have 2 points. The first is, I think there's nothing controversial to me about exposing in core the facility to say, here's a string, is this ESM for sure, or question mark? Like that API is fine to me. The part where I get concerned is the where it actually determines the parse goal of the file by node. And what has suddenly occurred to me that I'm surprised I didn't think of it sooner. When unambiguous syntax was pursued in TC39, browsers some members of the committee who are part of browsers, I'm trying not to throw them under the bus, but like they objected on the basis that the same reason they chose script type module and that browsers chose not to do any sort of auto detection at all is because the thought was that it would be very surprising to start typing a file and suddenly have its parse goal change. For example, let's say you're using a hot reload and you save it and then you add an export or an import and then suddenly it parses differently. Similarly, they wouldn't want you to be typing in the ESM file and then delete an import and then until you put in a new one, it suddenly parses differently. Was thought as being very surprising. So it strikes me as being, if we're pursuing consistency with TC39 and with the language, it seems that the general thought has been that this sort of auto detection is a foot gun and can kind of throw pull the rug out from underneath people.
There's a big difference though, if I can just respond to that, is that this is explicitly opted into. Like, I don't think, no one's proposing we make this like the default behavior. So this would be only in use cases where you just don't know the goal of the input for whatever reason and you can't figure it out. You have a way to like opt into this.
Sure, but if we had like VM run script and VM run module, which I'm assuming we would, or some way of explicitly doing it, then you could use the API, the general API, to say, what do you think this is? And then the code could decide, I want to run it as a module, instead of allowing Node to make that decision for them. So it would still be possible to do what you want. It would just be some extra steps. But there are 2 hands raised, so I want to be respectful there. So Gus and then Jeremiah. Gus? Yeah, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I'm just curious, like, given the most recent update to this, where it's just basically import export, like you just said, it would be for something where you don't know the kind of the file at all for some reason. But if all we're doing is detecting import and export states, I think that goes back to the discussion we had like a year ago, maybe, where the conversation basically ended up being, if it can't, like, if you have a file you don't know the type of, and the smartest you can be is, does it contain import export, then there isn't really a point to having the feature at all, because you haven't solved the problem of whether you know what kind of file it is yet. You've got the one half of it, if it's an ESM file, you can basically grep the file for import and export, but the other side of the coin is basically a big question mark. So the feature was like I think we had a thing about this where I was talking about like the other side of
the end of that conversation was that that kind of means that it's useless if you wanted to apply it to every file, but if it's the entry point only, it's still pretty valuable, because it's going to be awfully rare that you have an ESM entry point that doesn't import or export anything. You know what I mean? So
I'm just trying to figure out, like, I just really don't know what kind of file I'd run this on, where I'd be both in a situation where I have this random file and I'm okay running it kind of like YOLO mode.
Can we rename it the YOLO?
You know what I mean?
Okay. Jeremiah, you want to?
Yeah. So I mean, I think I would prefer that we avoid doing auto detection. I think of any form, partially for reasons that were, already stated. I do think that there's perhaps a valid argument in saying, okay, well, at least if we have something that's able to do this, maybe not as a flag, but maybe as like a function, then at least everyone else's sort of like auto detection will be consistent. Although I personally think that those other tools are laying themselves landmines by doing any potential auto detection that we should probably not help enable.
I mean, the use case I can think of is like, it's similar to the REPL, where like you don't want users to have to like fire up the REPL in one mode or the other. You want to just kind of handle what they throw at it. And a lot of the reason you would use like eval is like for debugging type stuff. And so you want it to kind of be easy.
Yeah, but the REPL's not really like any other kind of use. It really is there just so you can spit anything at it, right? Like that's kind of, you don't do that in like a file.
I just want to say the REPL, we're actually working on a custom parse goal that would go in TC39 for REPL environments, which is basically a sort of, I mean, it's kind of very fuzzy at the moment, but it's not something that could be solved with this kind of detection anyway.
Well, anyway, how about this? Just to wrap this up, why don't I refactor this PR into like Jordan was saying, some kind of function on, module or something like that. That could be an API that tools can pull in, and we can kind of go from there and see what people think of that. And if it gets added to input type at some point down the line, it could, but it would at least start here. What do people think of that?
That sounds fine to me. It's back portable. It's polyfillable. It's like something tools can rely on. I mean, and if no one uses it, then it's fine. So I'm good with that. Like if people use it, good, and if not, good. Right?
Would anyone object to that? Let me put it that way.
I am not a fan of this auto flag being put in.
Like even if it were something you like import from module as a function to run on a string?
Can I clarify? I guess he's not actually proposing the flag itself anymore. He's actually just proposing a functional API for detecting from string, and then to use it as an entry, you have to do the work after detecting via the function.
Okay, how about, sure, throw it in as a function, put it behind a flag, and we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Does that work? Yeah.
Sure.
Can we call it YOLO instead of auto?
Well, I think if it's a function, there's no need to be short. So I can call it something like detect import or export statement or something like that. And then you really know what the hell it's doing.
Experimental source detection.
All right, let's move on.
So I think we can bike shed on the issue, and I think we'll probably need to revisit this in the meeting before landing it. So it sounds like we have a direction here for now.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see what is next. Dual mode packages. So 299 and 273. 299 is Wes and 273 is Geoffrey. I don't know if anyone wants to take the lead on it. Geoffrey's talked a bit. Wes, you want to
Wes, why don't you
start talking?
I mean, wait, where do you want to start talking?
Well, I mean, it's just the concept is a bullet point on the agenda. So there's kind of the two counter proposals.
The concept is thus, right? So back when we first started working, we sat down and someone said, well, we have to do importing of things asynchronously because spec and technical limitations. right? So we sat down and went, oh, so that means ECMAScript module graphs and node module graphs can't really interplay, which means that it can't really be, strictly speaking, substitutable. You'll never be able to require ESM. And so, well, that means in CJS, we'll need to have different APIs for importing ESM versus importing CJS. And that separated entry point mentality has permeated a lot of decisions we've made since then. Now, I've been honestly slightly unhappy with that pretty much this entire time because of how it's tainted all of the discussions we've had since then. And I was made aware of some work that, I'm sorry, what's DevSnex's real name again, Daniel? Gus, there we go. Whew, that Gus had done where he experimented with just syncifying arbitrary promises within Node before. And after looking at that, I realized that because of how like the loader is architected, because like as many of you are aware, right now the spec doesn't actually require that loaders be asynchronous, but we would like them to be asynchronous because we would like user-provided loaders and potential future execution extensions to be able to be async. And so it's implemented right now with a bunch of async functions and promises. And so I looked at Gus's work and I'm like, well, this actually, like, the reason it doesn't work is because with arbitrary syncified boundaries, you introduce the potential for deadlock across those boundaries. The thing is, within Node core, that's not actually a problem when we're working with the loaders, because as long as we control all of the code executed within the loader, we can guarantee that there aren't any cross-boundary async dependencies, and therefore async versus sync is actually completely up to the choice of how things are executed in C++. Like, there isn't actually a difference from the runtime perspective. It's just about what gets called when. And so in that respect, I can actually go back and I can say, all right, with a little bit of fiddling, we can in fact require ESM in CJS. And once we have that, there's no reason to have air quotes dual mode modules, with the exception of being able to ship an implementation for old versions of Node. At that point, you want to just say, if I ship ESM, execute ESM all the time. If I'm required from CJS or if I'm imported from other ES modules, give me the same thing. Let me only ship one implementation, please. Like, there's no reason to not want that, really, because to me, it's almost insane that you would have multiple implementations of one module knocking about in the same runtime. And I know because versioning conflicts, that already does actually happen, having multiple implementations running around in the same runtime. And that does cause people problems already, because versioning problems are non-trivial as it is. Introducing format differences into those versioning problems is not something I look forward to. And so avoiding it by only having one actual execution happening at once seems like a very nice feature.
Geoffrey had his hand raised, and then I was going to try and slip in after that, and then Salaz after that.
Sure. So I was just going to say that I think these two proposals aren't nearly that far apart. Like, they're not really truly counter proposals, I don't think. I think really there's like kind of two big parts to what Wes is proposing. There's like this, basically require of ESM, which I think could, and I've been encouraging in the thread, like that should just be a PR of its own. Like require file.mjs to work on its own and stand up to the scrutiny of code review. And if that is all possible, then sure, like we can look into, so what would that mean for packages and package loading and all the rest of that? And I would encourage you to make that be like the kind of the first step. The other part of this was kind of going back to the old experimental modules implementation of like reusing the main field and using extension detection. And I've always been not in favor of that approach. But I don't think that seems to be so core to your proposal. It sounds like you were willing to do the new field for it as an option.
For me, what it is once you can require ESM, then it becomes obvious and transparent that how require loads things and how import loads things should not diverge, because you want the same specifier that you pass into both of those endpoints to resolve to the same thing. And so everything is in
I think a lot of people like myself are going to want to publish stuff that works in old version of Node. So we still have like dual packages. They're just not dual packages within
Node
the
support
version.
extension resolution, right? And that's the great part about that. That means that you can actually still publish packages that support old versions of Node. Like I would have
I'm not in favor of the main of overloading main because it doesn't work with like the source and dist model, which I feel like is a pretty common model for people who are going to publish dual packages. And users are already familiar with putting stuff in a module field or a browser field, of putting like a separate entry point in a new field.
So here's the thing.
So this segues into my raised hand, if you don't mind. So the source and dist model is already a pain point in CJS, and
right.
I think that should be solved in both places or neither.
Exactly.
I don't think we should. And then separately, I absolutely will publish all 100 plus of my packages in a way that they will work in both new and old Node. It would be great if I didn't have to avoid using ESM syntax to ensure that. And so I would like some way to do dual mode packages. I think I agree with, I don't know, I don't have a huge like conflicts with either of the two proposals. I just want to make sure that it can be done in some way. I have expressed in the past that I'm very in favor of extension resolution because I think that does address it, because the way that the source and dist problem is currently solved in CJS is that like you have a couple top level files that import from dist, and you know all your actual code is in source. So there's hacky solutions which deserve a better solution, but not an ESM only one. So I think that if we have extension resolution and if we have some answer in an ESM supporting node to make sure that the common JS file can't be required for the same specifier, like can't be brought in, you know, that you don't have the two copies for the same package on disk, then I think that would be a really good place to be. So if you guys have a quick response, and then the next hands up are Scylla and then Jeremiah.
I assume that means yeah, quick response. I mean, Jordan, I agree with you wholly. That's why I looked into this. Like, I do think that exports is a good thing to apply to both CommonJS and ESM, because clearly, like, everyone wants it, right? Like, people who are writing TypeScript do want the ability to just say, well, I've got my TypeScript in the source folder, but you know, having my exports defined from the dist folder is pretty nice. And like right now, that is solely done through extension resolution. And extension resolution is a serviceable solution, but a prettier solution that allows you to specify entire directories and entire entry points is desirable. And limiting that to only ESM through some kind of module field or alternate main field is just that, limiting. And there's no reason to limit it to just ESM. And working on that, old versions of Node already support extension resolution. Old versions of Node already have a single main entry point. Working with what old versions of Node support, building a layer on top of it and saying, this is how you get a new default behavior in new versions of Node that support ESM, but you don't have to, you can ship the same configuration file, and on an old version of Node, you will get an older, the older implementation that works on the older version of Node. It's a good way to layer that API, in my opinion.
So I wanted to jump in. I like the idea of breaking down what your issue really touches upon into several sub-problems, and one of them is definitely the idea of resynchronization of the asynchronous-synchronous boundary. And honestly, if we can get, if we can touch something like that in order to actually see what would like we can solve it on a technical level, that you can flatten the differences between sync and async on the technical level. But the side effects of that would be something that we would also have to really explore. From
a lot of this, like you know, child process.exec already exists in Node. It works in pretty much the exact same way.
Yeah, so you know, if we narrow down on this particular aspect of the chronological gap, can we work towards some sort of a model that we can, you know, throw things at and see if that works? I think that would be a suggestion, moving, you know, in that direction.
Like I do have an implementation where you can just say require file.mjs and it uses the MJS loader, but it's not synchronized with what we currently have in master. I think it's like 10 commits out of date now.
Yeah, it doesn't transpile, you know, the module into something that is not ESM, right? Because we've already done that.
No, can I cut in real quick? We have 6 more minutes, and we have the rest of this topic. Jeremiah has his hand up, and then we still have 3 other items. So that's about a minute and a half a topic. Jeremiah?
Okay. So yeah, I think I agree. Well, I do agree that the like sort of like I guess ultimate purpose of having dual mode packages is kind of invalidated if you have sync, and it kind of exists, or at least originally, to solve the problem of having sync and async. So I'm not sure if it's really. I don't think it's necessary if to have dual mode packages if we don't have this async sync problem. I think it could be nice for backwards compatibility, but there are certainly other ways to do that, and people, I mean, already maintain various different branches and forks and things of existing modules that are backwards incompatible to various versions of Node anyway. So that's a problem that exists anyways. I don't think that's that big of a deal. I do want to mention on the idea of making it sync. When I had looked into this, so I had looked into not making it, not necessarily, well, not specifically in making promises or the promise chains in the loader execute synchronously, but I had looked into making essentially any true async calls that you made. As for example, to libv, it would open like some handle that would be persistent, and then you'd have to worry about if you did another async call or whatever. And I don't think I don't think doing that is viable. Now, that is kind of backed by the idea that the reason you'd want to maybe do it that way is kind of backed by the idea that top level await may someday become a thing. Now, I know Miles isn't here, but Miles is still pushing TC39.
The best part about top-level await is that top-level await controls the execution of a library, and the execution of a library actually has absolutely zero bearing on when and how the namespaces for that library are available and how the resolution of the specifiers occurs. It actually doesn't matter.
For resolution, but if you are requiring from CommonJS, you are also doing this during execution.
I mean, the execution of the ESM.
Can we keep this going offline? We have about 3 minutes now. I'd love to at least touch on some of the other 3 topics.
Can I just suggest we wrap this one up, and then I think that's all we'll have time for. Did you?
Yeah, if everyone's okay with that, with basically punting the other 3 items to a new meeting, then sure. If there's no objections, then go ahead and wrap it up. And Rob has his hand up as well.
I was just going to suggest that we have a meeting dedicated to dual mode, dual packages, maybe out of band or not, I don't know. But I think that's probably one of the most important things in phase 3 that I'd love to make progress on sooner than later. So I think maybe after Wes gets this PR up and we can look at it, then I think we should have a meeting dedicated to this if people are up for it.
Okay. Maybe Geoffrey, could you file an issue with the doodle for that, and we can see what people are interested in?
Yeah. How about after Wes's PR is up, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I just mean you're assigned to it.
I'll do it.
And Rob, you had your hand up?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, vaguely.
Okay. So Wes just stated that top level await doesn't matter, but the way that the module graph unfolds and gets released is that you must complete all of the await points before the next level can even begin to evaluate. So I think it does matter.
Yeah, the current proposal, it does matter.
You still resolve the entire graph before you evaluate it. So I don't understand. So like.
Yeah, like you still resolve all of the namespace objects before you even start evaluation, and the namespace objects are all you need to return the appropriate namespace object to CJS. In fact, all I do is do the resolution, get the namespace objects, return the namespace object to CJS, get the namespace object to return to CJS, kick off execution, and return the namespace object. If the execution is async, then it will be async. Go for it. It's going to be async. The only thing that you could argue needs to be different about that is depending on how you want the interop to go. Do you want the require to implicitly await the asynchronous execution of an ES module? And if you think it should, then that also needs to be syncified, and that's where there's a problem. However, I don't think that should be the case because require has never returned a promise implicitly before. And so in that case, in the case where the execution does end up being asynchronous, if you want to have an indicator that you in fact need to wait for the namespace object to be finalized by some async operation, then you probably just need to say that the require in that case can return a promise if the graph actually does contain async executions.
It's not that simple. We need to talk about this.
That already exists. And if you want from a CJS module to wait for the result of the require to be ready, that's what dynamic import is for. But thank you for explaining that. I now understand your concept, which is that require will instantly return the namespace object, regardless of whether the module has evaluated yet or not.
Yeah, it will return the namespace object, kick off the execution, and then if the execution is async, obviously the synchronous part is done at that point, and it'll just return the namespace at that point in time.
Okay, so just now, in case our meeting gets cut off any second, thank you for attending. We can keep trying to chat. I don't know how to keep everything going, but alternatively, we may want to just cut it off and continue discussion on GitHub and see each other next week or next meeting. Cool. All right, thanks everybody. We got consensus on a thing today. That's excellent, and we have some direction for some other things. So I'd like to keep up. I think we all like the momentum of having something go forward. So let's try and keep that up every meeting. That's a nice trend.
Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Thanks. See y'all.